right, lots of soul in the house today. And this is my second service, so I'm really full of soul. It's really wonderful to be here. So earlier this week, I came across a podcast that caught my attention. And it was a story of a man who authored and created a program called Radical Responsibility. And this program, Radical Responsibility, was about how he was teaching people, going into corporations and businesses and teaching people how to work and deal and be responsible for their victim archetype. And I found this podcast very interesting and fascinating. But what really captured my attention about this story of this man was when I heard his bio. And this man had been incarcerated for 14 years in federal prison for drug trafficking. And while he was in prison, he decided that he needed to change who he was being in life. And he needed to do that because he did not want to leave the legacy of how he had been living to his 9-year-old son. And what is so fascinating about this story is that I knew that when I heard this, that this was going to help me to deliver the message that I'm going to give today. So I really didn't listen to much of the podcast because I already had what I needed. And to quote a dear friend of mine, Kathleen Hassan, we are one nation under pressure. And we are struggling to be one nation under God. We are not in alignment, and our values are not clear. And one may think, we may think, you may think that the pressure's out there, but the pressure's in here because we are the people. We are in a bit of an identity crisis, wouldn't you say? We're struggling to find our way forward and not quite sure how it's all going to turn out. This is a turning point for us. So I want to share an experience with you, one of my experiences. And it was my turning point in my life, one of my major turning points in my life. And this happened when I was 31, but prior to that, of me turning 31 in that time period of my life, I had been living and working and doing my life in a way that, everything felt like it was great, because it basically was. But I did have this inner knowing inside of me that there was something that wasn't quite right about my life. And I was asking myself just some questions, nothing too profound yet for myself. But I was just curious, like, oh, wow, so this is how life is. You get married and you have children and you do your thing and you continue. And, but there's still kind of this thing that was missing inside for me. So it wasn't until during that 31-year period of mine that the discovery of my mother having ovarian cancer happened. And when that happened, that changed everything for me, because that kind of woke me up out of the sleep that I had been in, that I hadn't even realized to the degree that I was in. And I started to ask some very profound questions of myself. Having gone 12 years to Catholic school, I still couldn't answer the question if there was a God. What is the meaning of my life? What is the meaning of life itself? And what am I here to do? What is my purpose? And so that took me on a road, and that became my spiritual awakening. And I share this story because it's an archetypal theme for all of us. We all can relate to this in some way, whether it's a major crisis or it's small things that happen in our life, or it's just turning points that we get to, whether we're in a job, in a relationship, in an environment that no longer aligns with who we are being and who we are meant to become. And this is the story of that man. He reached a point in his life, he was in a crisis. He was incarcerated for drug trafficking. And he had to take a hard look at himself. And another part of my personal story is that when I had made some of the changes in my life, the environment and the people that I was around were no longer aligning with who I was becoming. And then that became a problem. And we all can relate to that. And the other part of that is that I had to actually come out and say much more clearly to the people I was around who I was being, and no longer hiding what I was feeling and what I was thinking and what I believed. And that takes courage, as we all know. So we are living in a time right now where we are collectively being called forward. Can you feel it? Yeah. We are living in a time where silence is no longer being silenced or tolerated. Old paradigms and mindsets are dismantling, maybe not as quickly as we'd like them to, or in a direction that they feel like we want them to go as of yet, but they are. We are giving ourselves permission to speak truth in a way that we haven't before. And this change that's happening all around us of what we're feeling is compelling us to act differently and be seen differently. Do you feel that too? Yes. So this is a new era of healing. This is a new era of healing that is in the archetype of identity. Who are we being? Who are we not being in the world today? I believe that we are all asking ourselves on some level some powerful questions. Who am I being? Who am I not being? What am I saying? What am I not saying? What am I doing? How am I acting? This healing comes by not just how honest we answer those questions, but by the actions we take in answering those questions in our life. I'm going to say that again. The healing comes by not just how we answer the questions, but what we do with the answers to those questions that we hear for ourselves. That's what's so imperative here. That is part of the healing paradigm, the healing identity that needs to happen for us, because we are the people. I have been in the transformational business for over 34 years. And before I came to do the work that I do now, which is helping people transform and redesign their lives, I was a hairdresser, and I was transforming people's hair. And let me tell you, I learned a whole lot with working with people. Not only what happens when somebody sits in front of a mirror and having to look at yourself, that was fascinating. But what was even more fascinating is that trying to get people to change their identity, that was always so challenging. And even when they wanted it, and even when they did it, they would end up back to the same way eventually. Not everybody, but a lot of people. That was fascinating for me to watch. And there were some people who would say to me, "Oh, I'm going to do it when I lose weight, when I do this." And when I retired, I was still doing some of those same hairstyles. We get so attached to who we are. And we get so attached to who we are because we believe it becomes who we are in that way. And one of the things that I learned in the area of transformation as I come to do the work I do today, is that when we are wanting to change, to transform from one way of being to another, it actually feels like we are losing a part of ourselves, like we are losing a limb. Like it feels like a spiritual death. And yet at the same time, it's the very thing that we must brave ourselves through. And I say this not for us to judge ourselves in any way. I say this because it's part of the human condition. So I read a book by Carolyn Mace years ago, and the name of the book was Why People Don't Heal. And what I came to understand about that book is that what she shared is people don't heal because they do not want to have to change who they're being. They do not want to have to give up who they have been in order to get what's on the other side. And what's so fascinating about that is what's on the other side is everything, right? But what we're so afraid of is the unknown. And yet the unknown is where the potential lies. It's where the magic happens. It's where possibility is. Because the known world is what we know, and we're limited by what we know, and we're unlimited by what we don't know. It's such a paradox. There is also a new era of healing that is upon us, and has another powerful message, and it says, "Me too." It says, "Me too," which is paving the way for us to speak truth and for truth to be heard. Whether it's in a response to a trauma, whether it is in response to just a truth that needs to be heard, this is radical responsibility for us. Like I said, silence is no longer being silenced. Wake up, clean up, grow up, show up. What must be expressed or taken action as it pertains to the art, what needs to be expressed or taken action in the archetype of identity in your life today? Because here is the truth. It isn't about us. It's about what wants to come through and what we're not allowing to come through. And when we can get ourselves out of the way, that can happen. So we are in a position right now where the old paradigm of how we've been holding ourselves, even an identity, is no longer going to serve us as we move forward. And this is one thing that I know that everybody here probably believes, is that we are a human being having a spiritual experience, right? No, we are a spiritual being having a human experience, right? That's how it goes. And so if we know and believe that we are a spiritual being, then what we know is that we are pure love, and that everything is possible, that what we do is about our spiritualness of our life. And so the old paradigm of that we're not enough, that I don't value myself enough, that I don't have enough of self-esteem, is just not where this is going, you know? We know that that's not the truth. And it's time for us to act as if we know that that's not true, because it is not true for us. So what was so compelling about this man's story that I was listening to was that he was his own self-examination of who he was being and who he was not being in his life, and how he wanted to change that legacy for himself and for his son. And in changing that, he started these 2 nonprofits while he was in prison. And that he created this program of radical responsibility afterwards. That's what was so compelling for me about this story. And the thing is that everybody's expression comes up differently. You know, not everybody's going to have a nonprofit. Not everybody is going to create a program. But it's all relative to each of us and to what it is that we're doing and who we're being in our life. That's the important message here, that it's all relative. There is nothing that is smaller or greater than the other, because in the eyes of spirit, it is all the same. We're doing our work. We're showing up. We're being who we are, know that we are here to be, and how spirit wants to work through us. So I ask you, what are you holding inside? What talent do you have that you're not showing? What shadow do you need to bring to light? Because it isn't only just what we keep hidden because we're afraid of other people to see, because it may be something that may not, that we may feel shame about, but it's also how we're holding our golden light inside. And that's powerful right there, because when we hold ourselves hidden and in shadow, we are holding that golden shadow as well. So what choices do you need to make to find your truth and align with your core identity? What do you need to say? Who do you need to be? What light is trapped inside you? Where do you need to take radical responsibility? So the message here is about being more of you, not because you're not enough, but because you're more than enough. And it's already inside of you, and it's needing to be brought forth now, because we are one nation under pressure, and we are struggling to be one nation under God. Thank you.